Welcome to the Partis channel. Today we explain Prophets Kings 2, chapter 20 in a clear and simple way, step by step. And let me tell you, we're looking at a text that is just packed with massive ancient armies, towering political egos, totally unexpected military strategies, and a really profound lesson in following instructions. This is a chapter where the stakes for the nation of Israel literally could not be any higher. Now, to hook you right off the bat, I want to share what's honestly one of the greatest comebacks in ancient history. King Ahab of Israel delivers this absolutely legendary, defiant response to the arrogant King Ben-Hadad of Aram. He says, "One who puts on his armor should not boast like one who takes it off." In other words, don't brag about the victory before you've actually fought the battle. This single line perfectly sets the stage for all the intense political and military drama we're about to unpack. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our step-by-step roadmap for exploring this chapter. We'll start with the siege of Samaria, move to the first battle, then the battle of Aphek, followed by the treaty and the rebuke. Finally, we'll hit some key ideas and lessons and wrap it all up with a quick chapter recap. All right, part 1, the siege of Samaria, where Aram attacks Israel. So let's establish exactly where we are in the story. We open with a total existential threat to the northern kingdom of Israel. King Ben-Hadad of Aram, which is modern-day Syria, has marched his forces south. And he is not alone. He's gathered this incredible coalition of 32 allied kings, along with horses and chariots. They surround the Israelite capital city of Samaria with just overwhelming, suffocating military might. And what are these 32 kings doing during this massive siege? The text actually notes they're just sitting around in their tents, drinking. From outside the walls, Ben-Hadad sends messengers in to King Ahab with a crazy demand. He says, "Your silver, your gold, your best wives, and your children, they're mine." And shockingly, Ahab actually submits. He says, "I and all I have are yours." He's basically willing to accept vassal status just to save his city. But Ben-Hadad pushes it way too far. The demands escalate. He sends a second message saying, "Actually, about this time tomorrow, I'm going to send my officials to search your palace and the houses of your officials, and they will seize absolutely everything you value and carry it away." Ahab calls the elders of the land together and explains the whole situation. He points out, "Look, I was willing to pay that initial tribute, but this new demand is just total humiliation and ruin." The elders and the people give him very clear advice. Don't listen to him. Do not agree to his demands. So Ahab draws a hard line. He tells the messengers he'll agree to the first demand, but definitely not the second. When Ben-Hadad hears this, he threatens to turn Samaria into so much dust that there wouldn't even be a handful for each of his soldiers. And that is exactly when Ahab delivers his famous one-liner. "One who puts on his armor should not boast like one who takes it off." Enraged, the drunken Ben-Hadad just orders his men to prep the attack. Let's move to part 2 and see how this builds. The first battle, which turns into a classic underdog story. Okay, so the massive army is prepping their siege engines, and King Ahab is trapped inside the walls of Samaria. But then an unnamed prophet suddenly approaches Ahab with a message from God. He says, "Do you see this vast army? I will give it into your hand today." Ahab, who's probably looking out at tens of thousands of enemy soldiers, asks a very logical question. By whom? The prophet answers, by the young officers of the provincial commanders. So Ahab numbers them, and there are exactly 232 men. Think about this massive disparity. Ahab is instructed to use a tiny vanguard of just 232 young, relatively inexperienced officers to start a battle against 32 kings and an entire coalition army. Behind them, Ahab assembles the rest of the Israelite army, which totals just 7,000 men, still a tiny, tiny fraction compared to the enemy. Ahab asks who should actually start the battle, and the prophet replies, "You will." Now, the crucial point here is understanding exactly why God is using such a small force. The prophet explicitly states God's reasoning, "And then you will know that I am the Lord." God wants to prove his absolute sovereignty. This isn't about Israel's military might at all. It's entirely about divine intervention. So the Israelites set out right at noon. Meanwhile, Ben-Hadad and those 32 allied kings are still in their tents, getting completely drunk. When scouts report that men are advancing from Samaria, the drunken Ben-Hadad casually and super arrogantly orders, whether they've come for peace or for war, just take him alive. But those 232 young officers march out, and every single one strikes down his opponent. Suddenly, massive panic sets in. The Arameans rout and flee, with the Israelites in hot pursuit. The great king Ben-Hadad barely escapes on horseback. The king of Israel advances, overpowers the chariots, and inflicts really heavy losses on the Arameans. It's a stunning, miraculous victory. But as you'll see, the story is far from over. Which brings us to part 3, the Battle of Aphek, a truly massive conflict. Right after the battle, that unnamed prophet returns to King Ahab with a stark warning. He tells Ahab to strengthen his position and prepare, because the king of Aram is going to attack again next spring. And sure enough, the timeline moves forward. We're setting up the climax here as the Arameans return, but with a new, fascinating military strategy. Now, what's really interesting here is the military intelligence report Ben-Hadad gets from his officials. They're trying to explain why their massive army just lost to such a tiny force. You see, in the ancient world, people actually believed deities were tied to specific geographic locations. So the Aramean officials say their gods are gods of the hills. That is why they were too strong for us. Samaria, the capital, was located up in the mountainous hill country. So they suggest a totally new strategy. Fight them down on the plains, in the valleys. They genuinely believe Israel's God has no power there. Plus, they advise replacing those 32 kings with professional military commanders and raising an exact replica of the lost army, literally horse for horse, chariot for chariot. Ben-Hadad agrees to the whole shebang. He is completely operating under this flawed cultural misconception that Israel's God is geographically limited. So the next spring, Ben-Hadad musters his massive, rebuilt army and goes up to the plains of Aphek to fight Israel. And the visual disparity described in the text is just striking. It says the Israelites camped opposite them like two small flocks of goats, while the Arameans literally covered the countryside. I mean, it's like a giant wave about to crash on a tiny pebble. Before the battle even begins, a man of God comes to Ahab with a message. God has heard the Arameans' insult. The message is this: because the Arameans think the Lord is a God of the hills and not a God of the valleys, I will deliver this vast army into your hands, and you will know that I am the Lord. God is going to definitively prove his universal power over absolutely all terrain. For 7 days, these two armies just camp opposite each other. Then, on the 7th day, the battle is joined. And the result? An absolute, massive Aramean defeat that completely proves God's universal power. The Israelites inflict 100,000 casualties on the Aramean foot soldiers in a single day. The survivors scramble and flee into the city of Aphek, desperately seeking shelter, but divine intervention strikes yet again. The city wall miraculously collapses, killing another 27,000 fleeing soldiers. In total, 127,000 enemy troops are wiped out. King Ben-Hadad manages to flee into the city, hiding himself away in an inner room, just utterly, completely defeated. All right, moving into part 4, the treaty and the rebuke. This is where things get controversial. So the battle is won, but the politics, they're just getting started. Ben-Hadad's officials come to him, remember he's still hiding in that inner room, and they suggest a really desperate plan. They've heard that the kings of Israel are merciful, so they propose dressing in sackcloth with ropes around their heads as a sign of absolute total submission and just begging for his life. And here's where the falling action begins. Instead of finishing the conflict that God intended, Ahab makes a highly controversial political decision. When the messengers approach Ahab begging for Ben-Hadad's life, Ahab actually asks, "Is he still alive?" "He is my brother." The Aramean men immediately jump on this diplomatic opening. Ahab invites the enemy king right up into his own chariot. He shifts completely from a total military victory into a political negotiation. Right there in the chariot, they strike a deal. Ben-Hadad offers to return Israelite cities that his father had previously taken from Ahab's father, and in return, Ahab gets to set up his own market areas, essentially trade and economic zones, in the Aramean capital of Damascus. And Ahab agrees. He says, on the basis of a treaty, I will set you free. He makes this unauthorized peace treaty and just lets the guy who literally just tried to wipe out his entire nation walk totally free. Ahab prioritizes economic gain and political alliances way over the clear instructions and deliverance of God. Now, the text shifts to a bizarre, really extreme sequence of events, one that the prophet actually uses to set up an elaborate trap. First, by the word of the Lord, a prophet asks a companion to strike him with a weapon. The man refuses. Now, because this man refused a direct command from the word of the Lord, the prophet tells him a lion will kill him as soon as he leaves. And tragically, the text states a lion actually found him and killed him. The prophet then finds a second man and says, "Strike me, please." This time the man obeys, striking and physically wounding the prophet. Bleeding and battered, the prophet sets up his physical disguise by pulling his headband down over his eyes, and he waits by the road for King Ahab to pass by. This whole intense, kind of crazy sequence highlights the absolute deadly seriousness of obeying God's commands, which is exactly what King Ahab has just failed to do. When King Ahab passes by, the disguised wounded prophet calls out to him and poses a parable. He tells the king, "Your servant went into the thick of the battle, and someone handed me a captive to guard. I was told, if he is missing, it will be your life for his life, or you must pay a talent of silver." To put that into perspective, a talent of silver is a massive, almost unpayable fortune, roughly 75 pounds of silver. The prophet continues, "But while your servant was busy here and there, the man disappeared." Basically, he's asking the highest judge in the land, the king himself, to rule on his case. So what is the sentence for letting this super valuable captive escape? And this brilliantly illustrates the trap. Ahab answers without any hesitation, unwittingly springing it right on himself. He tells the disguised man, "That is your sentence. You have pronounced it yourself." Ahab declares that the man absolutely must face the agreed-upon penalty for failing his mission. He basically condemns his own actions. The moment Ahab says this, the prophet quickly removes the headband from his eyes, and Ahab suddenly recognizes him as one of the prophets. The prophet then delivers the harsh prophetic judgment, strictly from the text. He looks right at Ahab and says, "This is what the Lord says. You have set free a man I had determined should die. Therefore it is your life for his life, your people for his people." Because Ahab spared Ben-Hadad, a man God had explicitly delivered into his hands for destruction, Ahab is going to pay the ultimate price. He had been entrusted with a divine victory, and he just traded it away for some markets in Damascus. The chapter ends with this really heavy, ominous tone. Sullen and angry, the king of Israel went to his palace in Samaria. Let's move to part 5, key ideas and lessons. What can we actually take away from all this? Let's pull back from the historical narrative for just a second. We've walked through the Peshat, the literal surface-level text. So now, let's look at the practical, simple life lessons we can draw from this incredible chapter. I mean, what do we actually learn from Ahab's victories and his ultimate failure? First, absolute obedience to instructions and the cost of half measures. The story of the man and the lion shows us that when a clear directive is given, half measures or refusals have really dire consequences. Second, the danger of misplaced mercy. It's all about not compromising your integrity for a quick win. Ahab's decision to call Ben-Hadad brother and make an economic treaty, that wasn't true compassion, it was just political compromise. He spared an unrepentant threat for his own gain, and in doing so completely erased the security his military triumphs should have brought. And finally, recognizing God's hand in all victories. We have to acknowledge the source of our success rather than taking all the credit when things go right. Twice, God delivered an impossible victory to Israel, proving he's God of both the hills and the valleys. Yet Ahab acted as if the victory was entirely his own to just negotiate away in a chariot. And finally, part 6, our chapter recap. Let's make sure we've got the sequence of this action-packed chapter down. Here is a rapid-fire review of the 5 major narrative beats we just covered. 1. The siege of Samaria, where Ben-Hadad and 32 kings try to strip Ahab of absolutely everything. 2. The first victory, where 232 young officers completely rout a drunken Aramean army at noon. 3. The Battle of Aphek, where God proves he is Lord of both hills and valleys by destroying 127,000 enemy troops. 4. The unauthorized treaty, where Ahab controversially spares the enemy king for trade markets. And 5. Prophetic judgment, where a disguised prophet brilliantly traps Ahab into pronouncing his own doom. Which leaves us with this final provocative thought. Ahab is heading home, sullen and angry. He's got his wealth and his trade routes, sure, but a prophetic sentence hangs right over his head, your life for his life. So how will Ahab's doomed treaty affect the future of Israel? What actually happens next when a king disobeys the very God who just saved him twice? Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.